Joe from Mostly Off Topic here. Just wanted to share my thoughts on the announcement from Cubicle 7 that they are going to revise the One Ring role-playing game. So we're going to get a second edition of the game. Really big news for fans of the game. And now that I've had kind of a couple of weeks to think about it and digest it, I wanted to share some thoughts about why I think it's really good news for the game. Why is it a good thing that Cubicle 7 are releasing a second edition of the game? Firstly, it's the One Ring, so we get new One Ring content. It keeps the game alive and it revives it, it opens it up and brings in new players who want to explore Middle-earth through this great system. So it's great news that Cubicle 7 have still got the license and I've actually moved the time frame slightly forward, closer to the events of The Lord of the Rings itself. And it's also good that there's enough of a fan base, people like you and me, who are there demanding content, and there's enough demand that Cubicle 7 want to support it. So we've got the right company, Cubicle 7, continuing to support the game. I think if they change publishers or developers, I think there'd be questions about the future of the game. So great news that Cubicle 7 are going to continue to support it, expand on what they've already built, and bring some new ideas in. It's been 8 years since first edition, the very first edition of the One Ring, and along that journey since that time we've had a revised first edition, which, although there were incremental changes, had a big impact on the game. And we've seen from Cubicle 7 a great line of products for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the Adventures in Middle-earth series, which is really popular, and from what I've seen, an incredible job on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. So they've learned a lot, they've done a lot in the meantime, and they've got 8 years of experience, learning and development to draw on. Alongside that, they've got a ton of player feedback from people like me and you. They've got new content from players, so there are fan supplements. There's a ton of stuff out there in terms of insight and actual content that Cubicle 7 can look at and learn from in order to make second edition something really, really special. The second reason I think this is really good news for the game is that it's backwards compatible. You can use all of your first edition content. Now, Cubicle 7 haven't released too much detail on what that actually means, but I'm guessing that journeys, for example, will probably work in a similar way, and that maps at least will be compatible because they're the same scale. And I mean, Middle-earth hasn't changed a great deal in the 20 years between the two campaign timeframes. So hopefully all of your maps will still be compatible. In addition, I'd expect a few tweaks to characters and stats and traits and how they work. Possibly similar sort of approach to enemies, just some tweaking rather than a complete overhaul of the stat system. And there will be some kind of conversion kit for first edition. So, there'll be a PDF that you can download, similar to the changes from the first edition to the revised first edition. There'll be a PDF download that just kind of allows you to tweak the stats and the traits, I'm assuming. Obviously, we don't know yet. I also hope that they've made journeys a little bit more easier to handle and kind of more colourful and impactful out of the box. So it's one of the things that that new GMs and new players kind of struggle with, because there's not a huge amount of guidance in the core book in first edition on how to make journeys interesting and relevant to the campaign and kind of really exciting and impactful. And I also think we'll see some changes to combat, because that's the thing that really divides opinions. Some people love it, some people hate it, and I think we'll see a lot of changes to combat. We'll see some of the kind of stuff that was expanded on in the Adventurer's Companion. I think we'll see that in the core book for second edition. And probably there will be some rules for mass combat, which isn't covered at all in the first edition. And if you use the basic combat rules, it just doesn't really work for mass combat. It slows everything down. So hopefully there'll be some changes to subsystems and to skills and things like that, but nothing that completely changes the game. The third reason I think this is good news for the game is that the game is set 20-ish, 30 maybe years after the first edition. So we're moving away from the Hobbit timeline and moving a little bit closer to the events of the Lord of the Rings, not fully into the kind of time that Frodo leaves the Shire and all of that stuff. But it's a change in setting without kind of without changing the essence of what the One Ring role-playing game is. And we are going to Gondor. So the second edition will have a big focus on Gondor. That's really exciting. That's great news. It's the one region that is not really covered in any of the products so far from Cubicle 7. So lots of new options there. I would assume there will be some new cultures, probably some options for Gondorian characters, maybe rangers from Gondor, warriors, obviously, nobles might be a thing. And I believe we'll see much more interaction with Sauron's growing forces in Mordor. So Sauron declares during the first edition time frame, if we're kind of moving forward 20 odd years, then by that point his forces in Mordor are starting to grow and he's starting to nibble away at Gondor. Additionally, you've got the Southrons and all of that area of Harad, which is obviously rich for storytelling. Possibly we'll get a Harad culture option for characters, and that's not too much of a leap really, because if you think about it, I mean, we've got Dunlendings in the first edition that are kind of in that grey area in terms of good and bad. But we know that the blue wizards, the Astari, went into the east, into Rhûn, and south into Harad to kind of foment uprisings. And so there were good Harad people who fought for the free people. So that'll be interesting to explore. And it's new. We've not seen that before in the One Ring. Additionally, we've been promised for second edition the Moria box set. So this has been on the agenda for Cubicle 7 for a long time. They haven't got it out of the gate yet, but they have promised that it will be ready for second edition. I think they promised that it would be released alongside the second edition core book. So that's great news for anyone who wants to run a kind of dwarf heavy dungeon delve and kind of explore that amazingly evocative place of Moria. We haven't had a proper dungeon crawl product yet for the One Ring. Obviously it's a very narrative driven game and maps are much bigger and broader than the kind of dungeon scale maps that you might get for other games. But this is a great opportunity to do that, and Moria is kind of the ultimate dungeon. And although the second edition book will start kind of 20 years before Balin's quest to kind of rediscover and reclaim Moria, there's still potential there to kind of move more into that plot line. And it could be that we see a campaign that is really closely aligned or even involves Balin's expedition into Moria. And it'd be interesting to see how Cubicle 7 handle that with the Moria box set. So it's a really exciting time for the game from my point of view. I think it's just going to bring in more players. It's going to reinvigorate the game, get a lot more people talking about it and interested in the game. And with Francesco Nepitello driving the second edition, I don't see how Cubicle 7 can get it wrong. So it's great news. And, you know, all of your One Ring first edition material is still usable, it's still relevant, and that's just a great kind of service to the fans. So I'm glad Cubicle 7 did that. So yeah, keep playing the One Ring First Edition, and keep one eye on the future for more news from Cubicle 7.